Hi everyone, welcome back. Well, we're back down at Whiteman Park today working on the Whiteman Collection International Titan D tractor. A couple of thanks before I start with anything else. Thanks to Luke for sending me some photos and measurements for where the holes on the back of the drawbar should go to pin the swinging drawbar in place. He has his grandfather's Titan that he has running and is mostly complete, so these photos he sent have been a great help to me. So thanks, Luke. So we've managed, because of the photos that Luke sent us, I've now marked out and pilot drilled all of the holes in the back of the drawbar here. I'm just waiting on a 3/4 inch drill so that I can drill them out to full size, and then the drawbar is done. Thanks also to one of my viewers, Ian in Victoria, who sent me these two fantastic reproduction documents on the Titans. These have so much great information in them, and this is going to be a big help when we're rebuilding this tractor, just to get a bit more original information on all of the bits that we are missing. So thanks very much, Ian. So today's job on the Titan is actually to remove the back axle and rear wheels. And that sounds like a massive job. And it's not small, but it's not going to be too big either. The reason that we have to do this is that this wheel on the driver's side turns freely on the axle. This wheel on this side is driven by the axle. This is the axle here, and on either side there are white metal bearings. And the bearing on this side, they've got grease cups that should screw in here to lubricate them. And over the years, this one has got water in, and the axle has rusted, and it is seized solid in the white metal bearing. Now, the top half of the bearing is attached to the frame, and the bottom half of the bearing drops off once we take a bundle of other things off. We should then be able to just lift up the frame, roll the axle and wheels backwards, and then we can clean up those bearing surfaces and check the white metal bearings and just make sure that everything in there is okay and get everything turning properly. It also allows us to get access to the diff. Once we've got the axle out, or eventually once we've got the axle out, we'll take the two wheels off the axle and send them off to be sandblasted, but that's a little way down the track. So to get into the axle, we need to drop off the drawbar, the driver's platform, which is held on 2 springs and 2 pivots down the front there. So that's 4 bolts to drop the whole driver's platform off. And then this here that holds the steering wheel, steering column, brake, clutch and gear lever. If we drop this off, then we have easy access to the bottom of those bearing caps, and we can just drop them off with any luck. Now, I've actually had the drawbar off just to do a little bit of work to that. So that is just sitting on there down that end, but normally it has a pin holding it in. So we'll start by pulling that out, and we're going to take the 2 new pieces of metal that we made off, and that'll just make the rest of this carrier a little bit lighter for us to work with. So I'll start by just getting those few bits off, and we'll come back and have a look at what we do next. Okay, now that we've got our drawbar off, we can get in a little bit closer to actually see how all of this is put together. We've still got to remove this assembly here, and there's a bundle of bolts underneath onto these bearing blocks, and a couple right up the front there that holds up all of this rear assembly. This piece here is a casting and goes all the way up there and is riveted onto the steel chassis that's in front of that. And this casting here holds the top of the white metal bearing. Also the canopy struts, and the engine sits straight on here, so these bolts hold the engine down. Once we get, and so there's angle on the back here that runs bolts onto the bottom of these bearings and up to the front there to give everything a bit of strength. But there's only half a dozen or a dozen bolts holding all of this back assembly on. So it's not going to take too long to get that off. If we just go underneath, we've got this bolt here that goes through the two bearing caps with a spacer there, and that's one bolt there and one bolt here that holds this piece of angle on. The drawbar goes through here. And then if we come down here, it's a bit dark in here, there's two bolts there. Can we see them? Yes, we can. There's two bolts there that hold the angle to the bottom bearing cap, and two more right down there going through to the chassis. So what's that? 2, 4, 5 bolts on each side, and then the linkages for the gear lever. I'm going to drop all of this off, and we'll come back and have a look at the axle assembly, etc. Okay, so we've had a slight change of plan here. We've got the bolts up the front there undone, but if we come under here, this bolt here has got a nut in it, on the top. This one is threaded straight into the casting for the bottom of the bearing. And whilst we can get it this side, it's very hard to get into this one here. And they're both seized in there, of course. So what we are going to do instead is leave this attached to the bottom half of the bearing, and we're going to drop the bottom half of the bearing and all of this assembly off together. A couple of other things that I thought I'd point out here. You can see on these nuts here how they've been done up with a cold chisel in the past. They're all like that. This is all over the machine. Probably we're going to keep these nuts. If we can, we're not going to replace them. Whilst we're restoring this machine, we are keeping as much of its rough history that it has had over its life as we can. And that just shows the sort of tools that they were using to repair this probably out in the paddock. The other thing is, even on machines like this, you always do find paint somewhere. So there's a couple of big chunks of paint that have flaked off from in here under the grease. You can see a bit more in here. It's fairly dull looking paint now, but it does give us a good idea as to the colours that this machine originally was. Anyway, I'm going to finish unbolting these bearings and try and drop this assembly down and out of the way. So far, nothing on this machine has been easy, and it's continuing to live up to that. So these two bolts here are rusted into the bottom bearing cap, so I can't drop them out. But that's all right, because we're dropping the whole bearing cap out with it. The trouble we have now is that this top and bottom bearing cap here actually go into the wheel hub here a little way, which means I can't drop that bottom bearing cap out without either moving it across this way or moving the wheel out. So the next thing to do is to jack it up and try and slide the wheel out a little bit on the axle so that we can get that bearing cap off. there's not a lot that holds the wheel onto these. We've got a steel plate that bolts on there. Take that off, and on this side the wheel is keyed onto the axle because the axle is driving the wheel. Luckily the keys on this generally have a bolt hole in them so that we can screw a bolt in and hopefully get a lever under there, or we might put a socket under there and just try and pull that key out. I'm hoping it's just going to slide out. There's a bit of grease in here still, but it's all pretty old and dry, so it's just going to be sticking things in place more than anything at this point. Okay, so I've just got a socket in here as a spacer, big heavy washer on the end, and now it seems to be coming out just as we do this up a bit. It's sitting on a little bit of a step, so I've also got a pry bar to get in there, and that's just helping to pry it out a little bit when I've got enough hands to actually hold it in the right spot. So I'm just going to keep working away until we get this key out, and we'll come back and see if we can actually even rotate this wheel on this axle. Okay, so I do have the key out. It's a big long key, goes the full width of the hub, which is good because there's a fair bit of load on that key. But as is predictable with this machine, the hub is frozen onto the axle and I can't get that to move at all. I've put some stuff on to soak into it. We are going to have to get this off eventually, but that might be a problem for another day. So after having a closer look under here, I thought that this bolt here went up into the cast iron of the bearing. I'm sorry it's a bit dark under here, but I realised both of these two bolts that hold this angle onto here actually do have, well, not much of a nut left. It's rusted pretty much right off, which is why I couldn't feel it in there and didn't think there was one in there. So once again we can go back to the plan of dropping the angles off from underneath the bearing cap. I still have the problem of this bolt being stuck in here. This is cast iron here, and it's got a white metal bearing in here. White metal melts at a fairly low melting point, and so this bolt here is rusted into this piece here, which means I can't get it out. We will try heating this very gently and seeing if that is enough to free up the rust in there and allow us to either turn the bolt or tap the bolt out. But if we can't get this bolt out, we're going to have to probably walk away from this for a week or so, and I'll just keep putting penetrating oil down there, and hopefully eventually we can get that rust in there freed up. Anyway, I'm going to have a little bit of a go at getting those two bolts under there out, and we'll see if we can get anywhere from there. Okay, we got the bolts out. We've got this back bit supported on the engine crane just because there's not much holding it up now, and it should come out. We've got our bottom bearing cap loose, and that is heavy too, so I'm going to put the camera down and try and I'll need two hands to get that out, and once we've got that out we should be able to drop this down. The bearing cap on this side should drop straight down because it's got the thrust bearing for the differential up here, which means it should just drop down. So yeah, I'm going to put the camera down and see if we can wiggle that bearing out and drop it down, and we'll come back and have a look at it all afterwards. Okay, after a fair amount of wriggling, we got everything off. And these bearings look dreadful. So if we come down to this one, you can see there is a huge amount of rust. Now this is off the axle, because these bearings are white metal, they won't rust. The axle has rusted and expanded into the bearing, and that is why it would not turn. So all of that rust is fairly well stuck on. You can see how thick that is. So there should not be that much space in the bearing. The other one is not much better. So we can have a look at this. They do still have quite a few shims in there, and these are a slow moving bearing. So we'll clean everything up and just see where we get to and whether or not we need to put new white metal on these. Obviously we're going to have to clean the axle up a bit too. This side's not too bad, but this side you can see has got a lot of rust on here. So it's nice to have got all of this off. I was hoping next to just be able to lift the chassis up and roll the axle and two wheels out from underneath it. But of course we end up with the same problem that we had before, that this wheel fouls on this bearing, so we can't lift the chassis until we have shoved that wheel across, or shoved the whole axle across on the in the bearings to get that wheel past it. This wheel should be loose on the axle, so we might see if we can move this one out a bit and move the axle through on the diff. I'm not quite sure how this gear here is held onto the diff. It's probably keyed on, but I'm not really sure. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little video. It's nice to have got a bit further with this project, but I really had hoped to get the axle out this week too. But that's all right, we'll have another go next week and see if we can get a bit further. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye!